us?
Yep.
All right. How many of you have learned about DeSoto in your schools in Chicago? Crickets. Little bit. Well, down here in Florida, of course, it's a major part of our curriculum, particularly here in Manatee County. Because down here in Florida, we're pretty much ground zero for most of the exploration and conquest of the United States. My name is Park Ranger Dan Stevens. I am a park ranger interpreter for the National Park Service here at DeSoto, and our park here was founded back in 1948 to tell that story, to commemorate the DeSoto expedition, and to talk about the Native Americans. What I'm going to do is talk about a little story as part of that expedition, something that will appeal to the young. It's got a little bit of excitement and adventure in it, so it's not going to be so boring. I'm not going to sit here and talk about places and dates and people all the time. I'm going to talk about one person in particular, and this story might actually sound familiar to some of you. How many here like Disney? How many of here has ever saw the Disney movie Pocahontas? All right. Well, I'm going to tell you a story that's kind of similar. Actually, very similar. And actually came 60 to 70 years before the Pocahontas story. So we're going to find out something now you didn't know about American history. We're going to go back to 1529, 10 years before DeSoto will even land here in Florida. We're going to go back to a time when it was just after another conquistador by the name of Panfilio Narvaez had come to Florida. Now, Narvaez was a really bad guy, even by Spanish standards. But this story isn't about him. This story is about a man who comes to Florida in search of Panfilio Narvaez. See, 1 year after Narvaez disappeared into the jungles of Florida, his wife gets concerned. She hasn't seen anything. The ships that were sent here to drop supplies to him, nothing. So she sends several ships up into Florida to scout around and see if they can find Narvaez. One of these ships has a young man by the name of Juan Ortiz on board. Juan Ortiz's ship comes right in here to Tampa Bay, looking at starting to look at the last known place that Narvaez disappeared from. They pull up not too far from here, about 10 miles north of us. They pull up into the bays. Out in the water is a sandbar, which is, just underneath the water is a big thing of sand that people look like they're kind of walking on water, but it's not too deep. And they see, the captain of the ship sees about 10 Native Americans, Indians, waving to him. So, captain drops the anchor. Several Indians board the ship, and through means of communication, they find out, the natives say, Narvaez, the man you're searching for, was by here. You need to come ashore, and we'll lead you to him. Well, the captain was kind of wary about this. So he sends one ship's boat with 4 men ashore. One of those men is Juan Ortiz. They get ashore, and as they're rowing their ship ashore, the natives that were standing on the sandbar stop, and they run back into the woods. They beach the ship onto the shore, and the 4 men get out. They notice in the trees there is a brightly colored piece of cloth, which is a way that the Spanish would mark a bay for landing. So they start looking around. And then, all of a sudden, Native American warriors come out of the woods. They kill 2 of the men right away, shoot them with arrows. They capture Juan Ortiz and his friend, and they tie them up and bring them back to the village. At the village is the chief Usita. Usita, happy to see that he's got 2 Spanish captives, because Usita has a problem with Spaniards. He met Panfilio Narvaez the year before. Narvaez, remember I told you he was a bad guy? He's a man with a red beard, 1 eye, and a bad disposition. He was so bad that half of his men mutinied against him and left for Mexico before they even landed here in Tampa. But Narvaez has this thing where he meets Indians. He first goes, Siglo de oro! Siglo el oro! El oro! Know what I'm saying? Neither did the Indians. He's saying, where's all, you seen gold? Where have you seen gold? Where's gold? Que oro? Que oro? Where's the gold? The natives don't speak Spanish. So they go, what? And of course, Narvaez has the chief brought to him. He has the chief put down on the ground before him, and he's yelling at him, "Que hora?" The chief Lucina has no idea what he's saying. So what's the first thing Narvaez does? He pulls out his knife and cuts the chief's nose off. Then he says again, "Que hora? Que hora?" Chief still has no idea what he's saying. So then he takes the chief's favorite wife and throws her to the war dogs. And the chief is forced to watch as the dogs tear his wife apart. Then Narvaez is, pretty sure that the chief doesn't know where any gold is, so then he burns down the chief's village and leaves. Not a nice guy, is it? That's why most Spaniards didn't like him. So, here it is a year later, Chief Lucina missing his nose, missing his favorite wife, and has just rebuilt his village, now is looking at these two Spaniards as a gift. So what's he do? He takes the first Spaniard and ties him to a post and has his warriors shoot him full of arrows. The second Spaniard, Juan Ortiz, he takes Juan Ortiz, strips him, and strings him out over a Native American invention. An invention that we might use almost every weekend, an invention called a barbecue. And he proceeds to roast Juan Ortiz. Juan Ortiz is tortured. He is then pulled off the rack, thrown into a hut, and the chief sends his new wife and daughters in there to fix up the young Spaniard. Because the next day he's going to haul him back out and do it again, and again, and again, until he gets tired of that. Then he lets Juan Ortiz's wounds heal, and then he says, you know what? I'm going to make the young man run. So Juan Ortiz is then forced to run back and forth across the open square of the village from sun up to sundown without stopping. And if he decides to take a breath, get a drink of water, tie his shoelaces, he didn't have any shoelaces. But if he decides to stop, a warrior armed with a spear will throw it at him, keep him running. By the end of the day, he's exhausted. Again, Lucina has him dragged into a hut. The chief's daughters and his wife fix him up and get ready for the next day. This goes on for weeks, even months. By this time, the chief's wife and daughters are going, this poor man has had enough. I know you have a problem, but he's had enough. So he says, well, I'll let him prove himself. I'll give him a job. I'll give him the worst job in the village, and that is to guard the Temple of the Dead. Native American custom at this time period, they would inter their dead in a temple before they would bury them. Somebody had to stand guard. So it was Juan Ortiz's job to stand guard with a spear for several days to make sure animals don't mess with the dead. Then one night, they said it was a full moon, Juan Ortiz falls asleep. Falling asleep, though, would mean death to him. But he hears a commotion, he's startled, he wakes up, and he sees, due to the moonlight, he sees a rather large animal drag the body of a child out of the temple. So he, knowing that if something goes wrong or something's found out, he's dead, he runs off into the jungle after this creature. He then says, in his own accounting, I see two glowing eyes off in the bushes. I ready my spear and I throw. He runs into the bushes and recovers the body of this child. He brings it back to the temple. When two warriors sent to check on him show up, they say, what's going on? Why were you not at your post? He says, I was still here standing vigilant. Didn't mention being asleep, but standing vigilant. And I noticed a creature was dragging off a child's body. So they go into the woods and they find the body of a panther. They drag it back to the village. And now Juan Ortiz is a hero, much to the chagrin of Chief Lucina. So now Juan Ortiz is given clothing, given food, given respect, until they say in the accountings either the chief remembers that he's missing his nose, or another calamity has befallen his village, and he decides to sacrifice Juan Ortiz. The way he was going to sacrifice Juan Ortiz is going to have Juan Ortiz lay his head on the ground and have a rock dropped on him. So he drags Juan Ortiz out that morning. He's about to do it when his daughter, Ulili, who's been tending Juan Ortiz this whole time, jumps on top of him and pleads for her father not to kill him. Well, Juan Ortiz can't go against the wishes of his daughter, Usita cannot go against the wishes of his daughter, so he spares Juan Ortiz's life for the time being. But he plans on sending his daughter away and then executing him. So that night, Ulili helps Juan Ortiz escape. He travels, he runs through the jungle for 2 days in a direction that Ulili sends him. He then stumbles upon the village of Moscoso. Juan Ortiz yells in Calusan, "Don't shoot me, I was sent by Ulili." But unfortunately, the natives of this village speak Timucuan and have no idea what he's about to say. So they're about to shoot him with arrows when another native says, "I speak Calusan." He says, "Ulili sent him. We must bring him to the chief because the chief of this village is supposed to marry Ulili." So they bring him to the chief, whose name is Moscoso. Moscoso hears Juan Ortiz's story and he's horrified. He says, "This is no way our people treat a guest or even a slave in our society." So he keeps Juan Ortiz. He makes Juan Ortiz a member of his clan, his family. And when Chief Usita comes storming up to Moscoso and says, "I want him back," he says, "You abused him, you tortured him, and you almost killed him. He's my member of my family now." So they bring it to the big chief, Uraparakakse. Uraparakakse rules on behalf of Moscoso, and Juan Ortiz is allowed to stay at the village. Moscoso keeps Juan Ortiz there on a promise, one promise, that when your people show back up, you will have them spare us. Because Moscoso was no idiot. He knows the Spanish will show up again. 8 more years go by. Juan Ortiz is healed. He has now put tattoos on his body like the natives. He's pierced his ears with fish bladder earrings. He's grown his hair long and wears it up in a top knot now, where he tucks arrows and raccoon tails in. He's tanned and he looks like a native. One day, Moscoso comes to him and says, "Your people have arrived. It's time for you to go meet them. Remember your promise. You can take 4 of your friends with you to make the 2.5-day travel to the bay." Juan Ortiz makes that travel. He gets just to outside the bay when he hears something he hasn't heard in 9 to 10 years. He hears bells because Spanish horse soldiers tied bells to the bridles of their horses. And then he sees them. Spanish horsemen. The horsemen see him too. The one horseman kicks his steed, points in his lance, and rides down on Ortiz. One of his friends have already been lanced. Juan Ortiz then looks at the horse soldier, drops to his knees, and yells, "Cristiano de Sevilla, Cristiano." He says he's a Christian from Seville. The horse soldier rears up, pulls back his lance upon hearing that message, and they capture Juan Ortiz and his friends, and they drag him before Desoto. Desoto automatically sees that this man is different, that he is not native, even though he is dressed that way. He gives Juan Ortiz 3 days, because it takes Juan Ortiz 3 days to relearn Spanish. He hasn't spoken it in almost 10 years. Juan Ortiz then will relay his accountings of what happened to him. Desoto then demands to see this Chief Moscoso. So they go and they bring Moscoso to Desoto. Desoto looks at him and says, "Thank you. I will behold my man's promise to you." Juan Ortiz's promise will be upheld. He gives Moscoso a cape, a mirror, and a horse as a gift of thanks. And Moscoso's people are spared any type of molestation by the Spanish. Juan Ortiz makes a decision to stay with the Spanish, and he becomes the interpreter, the translator for the expedition. He travels up through Georgia, the Carolinas, over the mountains into Tennessee. He translates many different languages. He can speak 2, but through other natives, they were able to communicate. Unfortunately, Juan Ortiz dies in the 3rd year of the expedition of pneumonia. But his story comes back with us because he makes friends with a Portuguese mercenary knight named Elvas. And Elvas brings his story back to Europe. That story is printed on a new invention called the Gutenberg press, and becomes one of the biggest sellers in Europe, that behind of the sell of the Gutenberg Bible. And that very same book, called Desoto's Encounters in the Land of La Florida, is carried by one British sea captain by the name of John Smith. John Smith supposedly encounters a young native girl named Pocahontas, and supposedly that young native girl spares him from being killed by her father. Now, John Smith has never in his own personal diaries ever mentioned Pocahontas, and the fact that Pocahontas would have been about 10 or 11 years old when John Smith would have met her. But we don't want to call him a plagiarist, do we? People from Virginia get mad at me when I tell that story. But what we'll do now is we'll highlight a couple of the weapons we were talking about in that story. Of course, the Native Americans, the primary weapon of their civilization is going to be the bow and arrow. Native Americans used a lot of the natural environment to their advantage. Bows and arrows are an extension of that natural environment. Bows being, of course, made from wood, from hardwoods. Here in North America, the Native Americans would have used many different types of hardwood to make their bows, from mangrove to oak to poplar to ashwood. Depending on your region and what trees were available, you dig down into the heart of the tree to make your bow. Bows were standardly just a little bit taller than the native that was shooting it. And then you start at a young age. How old are you? 10. Well, you're already 2 years behind. You got to get started. About 8 years old, a Native American child starts to learn how to use the bow and arrow. You're 8? Well, come on up. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah, you need to start. Your dad's behind. I'll let you shoot something here in a minute, though, but it can't be the bow and arrow. This one's hard. So see if you can pull this back. There you go. There we go. Well, I will let you shoot something here in a minute, but we're going to finish the demonstration first. Sit down just for a second. I have a crossbow you guys can shoot. Whoa! Yes. Native Americans started training about the age of 8. They started hunting, fishing, and playing games like Chunky, which involved rolling a stone on the ground and the natives shooting at that stone to gain points. Other natives would bet large quantities of household goods on this game, Chunky, and that's a way that they would distribute wealth. Very popular game, almost like the Super Bowl with stones. Native American archers, though, were so proficient in the use of this bow that they could shoot 15 shots in 30 seconds. Wow. Out of those 15 shots, 14 hit their targets. Native American warriors were so adept at hunting and fighting in their environment that they could blend in with the surrounding woods, almost making them invisible and waiting for the right time to strike. They would draw their targets and fire. The Spanish didn't know what hit them. All of a sudden, arrows would be flying out of everywhere. The chroniclers like Elvas and Rangel would state it's like we're being attacked by ghosts. They were there and then gone. A Native American archer was also adept at being able to hide in cover and then run and shoot and disappear off into the woods, off into nowhere. This would be a challenge for many of the Spanish marksmen, particularly the ones that use this next weapon we're about to talk about.
Too much Minecraft.
The number one weapon in Europe at the time is the arquebus. The arquebus is a smooth-bored musket. It's one of the first mechanical firearms in Europe. Before the arquebus, guns looked like this. The gong. Gunpowder was first introduced in Europe about the 1200s, brought in by the Moors during a war called the Reconquista that lasted 780 years through Spain. During the Reconquista, the Moors, bringing in gunpowder, would use small arms called a gong. A gong is basically a tube on a stick. The Moors would pack this full of gunpowder, as well as sticks, stones, pieces of metal, or whatever. Then they would take a lit cord or piece of paper, touch it in this hole right here, and fire it. If you've ever shot a gun, you get a kickback called recoil. With that recoil of this weapon, it goes right into the stick, which will break the stick, possibly cause the barrel to shatter, and as well as the flare-up from touching the hole can cause some missing fingers as well. So you have an issue. Well, the technology of this weapon makes its way up through Europe, through Spain, France, and into Germany. The Germans take hold of that weapon, and what they do is they lengthen the gun barrel, and then they lengthen the stock or the stick. They lengthen the stick to go all the way down the barrel, so now it's stable when you get that recoil. And the Germans don't really like the idea of losing fingers, so they develop what's called the lock, a mechanical device that will lower the match into the mechanism. So now you have lock, stock, and barrel. You have a whole weapon. This weapon is the frontline weapon in use in Europe since 1529, when the King of Spain, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, defeats a French army 3 times larger than his, just the fact that his army was loaded out with small arms. Desoto will bring about 70 to 80 small arms with him to La Florida. This weapon is great in Europe because my enemy likes to march shoulder to shoulder in a straight field straight at me. So as an arquebusier, all I got to do is level my gun and fire. Doesn't matter where the bullet goes. If I aim at this lady over 40 yards away, the bullet's more than likely going to stray and hit him, or over here, maybe even hit the ground. But as long as I shoot the enemy, I've done my purpose, and my enemy's marching straight at me. Of course, here in North America, the natives don't fight that way. No matter how well I ask them, they're not going to line up and march at me. They're going to run in between the trees. They're going to attack me individually. They're going to shoot 15 arrows in 30 seconds. And there's the other problem. How many bullets can I fire in 30 seconds? Can I match that of a Native American? No. But we're going to test it out. I'm going to need you all to do me a favor. When I say go, I need you to start counting. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, so on and so forth, until you hear a loud bang. I will say, make ready, cover your ears. That's signal for you to cover your ears. But we'll see how many shots I can get off in 30 seconds. So as an arquebusier, I have my gunpowder in my vessels, my apostles. I have my lit match cord ready to go. Yep, it's ready to go. And I'm taking a nice walk through the woods in La Florida. When all of a sudden, oh, what was that? All of a sudden, arrows start flying at me from everywhere. It's time to go.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Counting decently slow. This is going to make me look good.
7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22.
Make ready, cover your ears. So we got 24, 25 seconds on the board. 1 shot to 15. Who's got the advantage?
You got 12 arrows. Yeah, 12 arrows.
I got about 12 to 13 arrows in me. I'm a pincushion. But with all of its issues, this weapon does save the expedition. But not in the way you think. It doesn't kill a bunch of natives. Actually, we have no physical evidence anywhere in North America of a native being killed by an arquebus. No wounds, no skeletal wounds. Not to mention that it's happened, just we haven't found the sites where we find the bodies. So how does it save the expedition? Well, at the end of this expedition, the men have tried to make a suicidal march down into Mexico because DeSoto's dead. I hate to ruin the movie for you folks, but DeSoto dies. The men are going to try to make a suicidal march to Mexico. When they get halfway there, they realize this is suicide, and they turn around and they'll march back up to Arkansas to the Mississippi River. There, staring at the river, they notice that the arquebusiers still have all their guns. They don't have any more black powder. They don't have any more shot. So the blacksmiths take these weapons away. They break them down, lock, stock, and barrel, and they make nails out of them. With those nails and the timber they cut from trees, they build boats, and they'll sail out the Mississippi River. 311 will survive. Escape the cursed land of La Florida. Thank you very much for attending our program.